All right. So today I'm going to do a sort of interactive, by interactive, I mean me talking, explanation of the example that we've had on our website at pursuanceproject.org for quite a while. But I'm going to go through it and explain in a way that's more readily understandable than what we have so far. But it'll be the same example. So if there's anything that is confusing or you want to catch again, you can go on pursuanceproject.org, scroll down, you'll see this very same example with diagrams. And here it goes. So when someone comes into Pursuance as a participant, that person, represented by a little circle, like so. Okay. This is Albert, this little fellow right here. Albert has joined Pursuance. No, it's not out yet. This is just I'm doing some explanations beforehand so that everybody will be on the same page. So Albert wants to create and I will be answering your questions as well. So anybody who has a question, just ask it there and I'll answer it. Anyway, so Albert, who we'll call A for Albert, wants to create a pursuance with the intent of encouraging prison reform and specifically helping the press cover prisons in ways that are not quite easy to do at this point. And so he has a plan for this. He has an idea. And his idea is to create an informational package for journalists explaining how they can use Freedom of Information Act requests to obtain the grievance forms inmates fill out to report staff misconduct and due process violations, and how this data can best be leveraged to cover the otherwise opaque U.S. prison system. That's what we have written on the website. To put that in simpler terms, he wants to help journalists cover prisons, and he happens to know that in all prisons, they are required to give forms to inmates that they have to, at some point, put on file and make available to the public, anyone who asks for them, in which prisoners set out their grievances. So that could be people are being held in the shoe illicitly, as happens quite a bit, or someone's not receiving their medication, or they're stealing funds from the prisoners to buy property, which is happening quite a bit in Alabama right now. But at any rate, the inmates themselves in the prison system are a vast wellspring of information that is not just useful to people in general, but it's something that journalists themselves can be shown they can be made to understand that this is something they can easily cover if they know what they're doing, and they themselves can not just do a good deed for the wider society, but also make their jobs easier. And that's a very important sticking point for journalists. Anyway, so aside from that specifics of that particular idea, this fellow is going to go about doing it, and he's creating a pursuance. Now, when he creates a pursuance, he is directly attached to it. He's attached to this little cube here, which represents the actuality of the pursuance, the potentiality. It's something like a DNA or a constitution. And starting out with him creating it, he's going to write up a charter explaining, here's basically what we're doing, and here's basically how we're going to do it. And that charter is visible to anyone, to the extent he makes it visible, to anyone else in the pursuance system who is searching through our database looking for groups to join or participate in, whatever. So then there's a number of ways that's done, which we'll go into another time. But at any rate, he creates his pursuance. People can see it. They can see what he wants to do. And having created it, he now wants to grow the pursuance. So obviously not to be just him. So going back to what his idea is, creating this informational package for journalists explaining how they can file FOIA requests to get these grievance forms and thus find out what's going on in prisons and find out who they can approach about them, et cetera, et cetera. Having come up with that idea, he needs to be able to get those things, create the information package for one thing, and then get it to journalists and get it to the right journalists. And so to do that, he's decided that he's going to need someone detail-oriented to figure this out. And so he puts out on the pursuance system this sort of message, which again can be seen in a number of different ways, saying that I want someone for this position. And we'll represent that like this. This is basically what it's going to look like in some way in the pursuance system. You're going to see lines coming off of individual people and lines coming off, in some cases, from the pursuance box itself. And we'll go into that later. But for now, this position will be under him. And the person applying knows exactly that that's the case. They know what they're getting into. They know that they, from the charter and from the explanation provided in the position application, that if they take the position, they will be working directly for Alberto, or Albert, whatever his name was, Alonzo. We're going to change his name for fun over and over again just to keep this on your toes. We don't want it to be too straightforward. So he hires or brings on Beth. Beth applied, explained her background, which could range from I have a degree in this, this, and this, or worked in this, this, and this, to I'm a clever person and I'm willing to do this work. Obviously, we don't want to sort of get out the impression that you have to have some official, badge of authority to apply for the position. Obviously, when we did this in real life with Anonymous, Project PM, things like Telecomics, all the groups that have gone on online to bring people together to perform a particular task, a lot of the people who were most efficient were not necessarily college graduates or professionals. They were just clever young people for the most part who happen to be able to do a particular job, which most of these jobs are going to involve research, coming up with ideas, etc. Someone's sending me a message for some reason. So Beth, who was a cipher, has now joined on. And so Beth's job is going to be to manage the details of the project altogether. This person, A, has an idea. He is not a detail-oriented person, and Beth is. So Beth is going to be one of the people that he kind of hands over a lot of the day-to-day stuff to. Now, Beth, like a lot of people who join pursuances, are going to be allowed the ability to bring on people under them. That, for the most part, with very few exceptions, is the way that these things work here. The default setting is that when you bring on someone under you, like Beth is allowed to bring on people under her. And that's a very basic principle of this, that allows someone with an idea or running an NGO or whatever to come on the pursuance system, knowing that they can, without a great deal of necessarily putting a lot of time or resources, or money for that matter, can create something very quickly that can grow, and that most importantly can not only grow, but will not require a great deal of individual oversight. And we'll get into why that works later. But so Beth is here, and Beth is going to be running. What is she even doing? I wrote this whole thing, but it was a year ago. Now I've forgotten what Beth does. Oh, it looks like Beth. Blah blah blah. Okay, so Beth has come on, and her job was to figure out how this is actually done in practice. And so Beth brings on Ellen. Ellen, I like to make my lines straight. I like to make my circles round. And that's, oh wow. Great thing is this will all be done automatically. You won't actually have to draw things on a dry erase board like I'm having to do. So Ellen is on. Ellen's job, and it's a job that she will bring people under, she will outsource herself to some extent as she compartmentalizes and kind of delegates. Ellen is going to identify news outlets and journalists who have covered related issues, like related to prisons, and who thus might be interested in receiving the package. And Ellen herself, being in charge of that larger goal, is bringing on someone specifically to handle some facet of that goal. In this case, she's bringing on Frederick. I like to make the names more whimsical. In my original deal, all the names were from obscure dragons from the Shadowrun universe. But people complained. They said it was distracting. And, life is full of compromises. This fucking thing. There we go. So, Frederick's job. I'll get an ambulance. So Frederick and this other person, Geraldo. Okay. So Frederick, who again, like everyone so far, is allowed to bring on others to create an application and make a hire, as we call it, even though there's no money involved. Has brought on Geraldo, hopefully not the famous Geraldo, because he'll fuck it up. But has brought on Geraldo to sort of help under him to do this Googling, searching around, figure out which journalists are out there that they are most likely to work with, that makes sense to approach. And that can be done a number of ways. Obviously, we're not going to get a specific example. Let's just keep it such that Ellen's idea under Beth here was to bring on someone and have them do all this Googling around. And so when these people identify journalists in this example who have covered prisons or covered criminal justice systems or otherwise just seem likely to be down for this, they compile it all, compile what paper they work with and what region that is, and shift that information back up. And that information goes from anyone who's down here has to go through whoever they're connected to get up here. That's a sort of filter system. So that's important, and we should talk about it right now because it's a major aspect of all of this, no matter what you're doing. With this system, let's say that Frederick and Geraldo both bring on 100 people under them. Those people who are only connected to these two, to the extent that they bring on send in great information that works and makes sense, they're going to push it up down into the core area. To the extent they're pushing up bullshit, or to the extent that it's just that it just doesn't work, that's only the problem of the person that brought that person on. So, to the extent that you're up here and you've created the system, you've done so knowing that you won't have to deal with whatever horrible things might happen at the outside of the system. So if there's someone who would do this in an IRC channel, for instance, or on Facebook, who just says, "Hey, everybody who wants to do this, come join me," is going to have to sift through a lot of responses, and they're going to deal with a lot of people who, as anyone who's worked in online organizing knows, aren't necessarily the right people for the job for any number of reasons. With this filtration system, that's not his problem. It's not her problem. It's not her problem. To the extent these two people have brought on lots of people under them, and they have so on and so forth, that's the problem of each person who decided to bring on that person. So it's a filter system that keeps the muck, or what's identified as muck, from clogging up the system. It gets clogged up as far from the core as possible. Human filter. Now, in many cases, contrary to our ideal example, it's going to be some of these people higher up, and not necessarily people on the margins who've been brought in who actually don't know what they're talking about, who are just simply wrong about something. And so when you have a large network, as a consequence, I'm giving up on the circles and lines being straight. So when you build a large network, and this person has a good idea, good information, and this doesn't really make sense in this example because generally it's just going to be names and regions. But if this person is a genius and Frederick here is a bureaucratic scumbag and for some reason doesn't appreciate this guy's ingenious ideas, and when this guy submits it to Frederick, he just says no, he doesn't push it up, it doesn't get anywhere. That's obviously a problem. And that's a problem that can also come into play even when there's really nothing wrong with the sort of middle people here. Just like a brontosaurus in the old examples that they used to teach at science fairs, but which they now know is not actually true. They used to think the brontosauruses, because of their size, it took a long time for a neuron response, like someone's tail being bit, to get to the brontosaurus brain. Now, we know that's not true, but it's a great example of how a large institution, can is sort of constrained when it comes to reacting very quickly or even recognizing good ideas from its margins. So to alleviate that, in part, we have one of many sort of little additions we've added to this basic framework. And that addition is that under the default settings of a pursuance, and these can be changed, of course, but we set the defaults in accordance with what we think is going to be most universally advantageous, obviously. The default settings is that anyone who's accepted into a pursuance anywhere has the right to send one message to anyone else in the pursuance without having to go through all of these other links. It could be the person who started it. It could be someone closer down the line who is more relevant to, but at any rate, you can send that message to any of those people. And if those people find that message to be useful, whether it be, there's something going wrong down here, or here's some information that these people just don't agree with, but I'd like you to see it. If that person finds that message to be of value, that person can renew that ability. So that person can, again, at some point, send that message on. And eventually, of course, if there's someone who's physically distant in the system and is sort of having to answer to people who are proving not to be as quick on the uptake as this person, someone up here can, depending on the different settings of the pursuance, move that person around where they belong. Just like when a janitor comes up with whiteout and you make him a director of research. So you have that to sort of alleviate the problems that do come up in institutions. Because, of course, as we go from an IRC or a bunch of people on Twitter or some just other amorphous group, Occupy Wall Street, whatever, towards a more systematic deal, you're going to start running into the problems. You're going to start running away from the problems that come with amorphous groups and start running towards the ones that come with institutions. And so obviously we're trying to reduce both sets of problems, which are generally pretty different. Anyway, so Pursuance is growing nicely, and they have people down here under Ellen or Eliza, whatever this is, finding journalists who might be good recruits, people to work with on this prison project. And they're sending information up, and it's going up to Beth. Now, meanwhile, Beth has also brought on someone else. This is the one good name I got to keep. She's brought on Dunzelcon, which is the name of a ancient magical dragon from the Shadowrun universe, who I believe resides in Germany in 2079. That's not important to you. It's important to me, though. Dunzelcon is here. And Dunzelcon's job is to take the information that's coming up through this quadrant here to Beth about the journalists, and Beth gives it to Dunzelcon. Dunzel sorts it into a database. Or it could be someone else. Maybe Beth creates a database, or Ellen creates a database and submits it to Beth, and Beth gives it to Dunzelcon. Regardless of how that works exactly, he gets this information, which is compiled, which in the raw material being compiled at some point over here. His job, Dunzelcon's job, is to take that information and determine which prisons are located near which journalists, and then make that database available back to Beth, who will send that, who will check the results and create a sort of a new document out of that and give it to Albert. Albert, in turn, having received that, then gives that information to someone he's also brought on as a different aspect of all this, connected directly to himself, whose name is C. And I'm sure C stands for something. We'll say it stands for Cato. So Cato then receives all this information. And as far as I can recall, it's Kathy. Oh, and she deals with the journalist himself. Okay, so Kathy gets this information, contacts the journalists with the information package that A is created or someone else at some point. She sends the information package to these journalists, deals with them directly, and facilitates their work on covering these prisons. So she sends them this big package that explains basic, this universal stuff. Here's how you do an FOIA. Here's how it works. Here are the resources that we can also provide you to make this easier for you and thus encourage you to cover prisons, et cetera, et cetera. So this is the basic pursuance right here. And from here, it can go in a variety of directions. It may add functions. It may just expand the people they have pursuing its original functions. And more to the point, as time goes on and other pursuances are doing their thing, it can build connections to other pursuances to share resources, information, strategies. They may build up a connection with multiple pursuances in which they all have an ethical agreement for different things. The bottom line is that these pursuances over time will connect both for pragmatic reasons, pragmatic short-term reasons of, we have somebody who does graphics, who do a lot of graphics, and you don't, and we're going to share him with you and have him help you on some things. And then in return, if there's a quid pro quo, you're going to help us do this or whatever. So you're going to have all of these pursuances that are all very, over time, grow more and more nuanced and more refined and larger. Also developing connections and thus evolving on this other sort of meta front where you have this this superorganism that arises. Now imagine this, and we have 1,600 people who have signed up thus far, more than 1,600, and that number is going to increase vastly once we get started with some of the events we have going on, and when my book comes out beginning of next year, which also goes in the Pursuance system. Imagine this just with let's say 1,000 people of those 1,600 we bring on. Imagine this with NGOs that we'll talk about later how that works. Imagine this with, you have academics, you have activists, you have very talented people, you have people who have great ideas or have some particular talent that for whatever reason they don't necessarily want to join an NGO. They don't want to necessarily go get a degree or do something that's necessary to really put their energy and talents into practice. But they're out there and they have these ideas and they have these skills. And every once in a while with things like Anonymous, there have been methods for them to come into a group and very quickly and efficiently get those things put into practice. This is what that is. And it does it on a mass scale. And it does it in a way that alleviates a lot of the problems that come up, again, both with institutions or in movements, a march, these amorphous things that kind of peter out or don't necessarily make good use of all the people who really want to help. Same goes for NGOs, nonprofits, all these organizations are out there. There's people like myself who would have loved to join the organization you have to have a college degree for, and you go and the Peace Corps that John Kennedy created, but you don't have a college degree because you don't want one or you can't afford one or whatever. Imagine how much more can be accomplished to develop and protect free, open, and just societies if we put some time and energy into thinking about how we organize and how we can do this better and what the internet means and what potential there is in the fact that for the first time in history, every individual on the planet can now theoretically collaborate with any other individual. That's something that we've known is true for a long time, but it's come on kind of gradually. And there's never been as much time and money and effort has gone into helping people better connect and share pictures and waste their time. Not a great deal of that same moxie has gone into figuring out how people can better get together and free people abroad, or bring their local police departments into compliance with the Constitution, or advance, the rights of women in third world countries, or a number of things that are already being approached, but they're not being approached efficiently. This is a more efficient way of doing all of this, and it's built. And what I've shown you is a piece of it. There's much more to it that we'll go into in other episodes. But even just this is a step up from the very haphazard tools we had to use when we were doing crowdsourced investigations of Project PM, which were successful enough, even as it was, to attract the FBI's attention. Or with a lot of things Anonymous did, the Tunisia assistance program, the exposure of criminal activities by the DOJ and these intelligence contractors that, thanks to recent events, are now finally getting real attention. All the things that were done to fight the SOPA legislation, all of these things with this can now be done better, and they won't just burn out under their own energy like Anonymous did. So that's the basics of Pursuance and how they work. In future videos, I'll explain how an NGO can easily use this to take existing functions and vastly expand the number of people they have working for them for free without incurring the risks that can involve right now. We'll also show how journalists can use this for crowdsourcing in a way that will ultimately appeal to them. And we do have some journalistic entities, outlets signed up to use this when we launch. And elsewhere, we'll show more about the system itself. We'll show how data libraries, central data library we have, will ensure that everyone who creates a pursuance that makes sense and is a sort of step above in terms of organization, or even a structure of a pursuance or a particular setting, can submit them to this central data library. And anyone who comes in wanting to, create a pursuance or improve their own will have access to this, so that everyone is always in touch with the latest best practice in every single endeavor. This is something that evolves on several fronts then. It evolves numerically. It evolves with the refinement that occurs with each individual pursuance as people get the hang of it and see the potential. It evolves on the fronts of individual refined pursuances connecting to each other, sharing resources, turning into ultimately a vast, evolving, dynamic, formidable ecosystem, superorganism that can confront criminalized institutions in ways that will within 10 or 15 years, I think, astonish the world. Thanks very much. Pursuanceproject.org. You can sign up there to be informed when we launch. You can also spread the word about Pursuance. Show that website. There's a good article in the New York Observer about what we're doing and how this works. There's a really shitty article on NPR that says that we're planning global chaos, but we're not, et cetera, et cetera. But do please spread the word to your colleagues, fellow students, fellow academics, other activists. Let them know that we are trying to move the ball forward and give them the tools whereby they can securely challenge institutions and, in general, better achieve the things that we all know have to be done. Thank you.